Welcome to the deep dive. Today we have a massive mission in front of us.
And putting it lightly.
You've handed us the entire volume of an academic journal. We're talking 20 articles across 5 distinct clusters, all from Exploration and Thought Volume 4, which was published in January 2026.
It's a really remarkable collection.
And this isn't just a survey of one field. This is, a systematic, multidisciplinary snapshot of what's happening in contemporary intellectual life, with a real focus on South Asia, mostly Nepal, but it definitely extends into India and Bangladesh too.
And what makes this particular deep dive so valuable, I think, is the standard behind the material. This isn't just a collection of essays. The journal is open access, published under a Creative Commons license, which is huge for making high-level research freely available.
That accessibility is key.
It is. And crucially, it upholds really high international publishing standards. So you have an initial editorial screening, and then it's followed by a very thorough, double-blind peer review process.
So everything we're about to discuss has been, peer validated. This is solid research.
Absolutely. And it's funded by institutional resources, like from Dartula Multiple Campus, which really sets the stage for future policy and scholarship in the region.
Exactly. So our objective today is to execute, kind of a surgical strike on this huge data set. We're going to synthesize the core arguments, the methodologies, and the policy implications of all 20 articles.
Think of it as your complete shortcut.
It is. It's your shortcut to being thoroughly well-informed on the current scholarly debate around these major global forces, AI, migration, the circular economy, and how they're colliding with these very specific, localized realities in this critical region.
And the thematic focus of this volume is just exceptionally timely. It really captures this tension between rapid technological change on one hand, and then these profound social transitions on the other. Things like population aging and youth outmigration.
And then how policy tries to keep up.
Exactly. The challenges of implementing effective policy across sectors like education, finance, urban planning. We're literally going to jump from, say, a deep ethnographic analysis of ancient cosmology.
All the way to quantitative studies on investor behavior.
It's a huge range.
It's a truly sweeping agenda. So we'll need to maintain a pretty focused pace, but we still want to dive deep into the nuance of each finding. We're going to start immediately with our first big thematic cluster, the undeniable and, often very uneven digital disruption that's reshaping education and development right now.
Right. And this first cluster, it immediately tackles that core promise of technology versus the persistent real-world barriers that exist, especially in low-resource environments. We're going to see a lot of that in the context of English language teaching, or ELT, in Nepal.
And our very first paper, it's really no surprise, addresses the hottest topic in education today, AI. It's titled, The Impact of ChatGPT on English Language Teachers' Classroom Practices. The author was Arjun Jung Rayamaji from Kathmandu University in Nepal.
And this was a narrative inquiry, which means he was deeply exploring the actual experiences of secondary English teachers as they tried to integrate this new AI into their instruction.
So what did he find? Was it all doom and gloom, or were they excited?
You know, what Rayamaji found really mirrors the global enthusiasm for AI. The educators he interviewed were, strikingly receptive to his capacity to just revolutionize the classroom.
In what way?
They saw it as this incredibly powerful tool to increase student input. I mean, think about it. It can provide instantaneous, tailored feedback on writing and grammar. That's something that's almost impossible to do manually in these huge classes.
So it's like having a teaching assistant for every single student.
In a way, yes. It promotes genuinely personalized learning. The AI can scaffold content, it can adjust vocabulary, it can create grammar lessons that are specific to a student's unique proficiency level. It makes instruction far more effective than, a one-size-fits-all lesson plan.
That really does sound like a pedagogical dream, especially for those mixed ability classrooms where teachers are just constantly struggling to manage differential instruction. But, and there's always a but.
There's always a but.
Where does this dream hit the wall? Because it's coming. This is where the reality of the Nepalese educational system starts to exert pressure.
It hits a huge structural wall. It's a wall of infrastructure and systemic failures. The primary barriers they cited were not a lack of will or technological readiness from the teachers. It was all about foundational resource deficits.
For example?
Well, Ryamaji notes that a full 25% of government schools still lack any internet access at all.
Which is a complete non-starter for cloud-based AI.
It's a non-starter. And beyond that, many of the teachers just lack the necessary digital literacy or, the adequate ongoing training they need to integrate these complex tools effectively into their pedagogy.
So the issue isn't a resistance to innovation. It's a lack of governmental and institutional investment to create the very foundation that innovation needs to stand on.
Precisely.
And I imagine beyond just connectivity, there are some pretty critical ethical implications here, right?
Absolutely. The educators were deeply concerned about the ethical side of it. The ease of plagiarism, for one, and the risk that if you rely too much on AI, it could fundamentally stifle originality, critical thinking, and the development of a student's own unique voice.
Which leads to the paper's big implication.
It does. We need rapid investment in two things simultaneously. The digital infrastructure, of course, but also capacity building that's focused specifically on what's being called critical AI literacy.
So it's not enough to just teach teachers how to use ChatGPT.
Not at all. They have to be taught how to manage its ethical use, how to prompt for originality, how to verify the AI's output. It's all about leveraging the tool for enhancement, not letting it become a crush or, a new, easier way to commit academic dishonesty.
That's a perfect transition, actually, to the next article, which looks at AI on a much broader, more global scale. This is Article 2, Artificial Intelligence, a catalyst for sustainable development goals of healthcare, quality education, and climate action. It's by Nandini Banerjee and Susmita Rakshit from Kazi Nazrul University in India.
And this one was a systematic thematic analysis. So they were assessing AI's role in accelerating progress toward three of the key sustainable development goals: SDG 3, which is health, SDG 4, education, and SDG 13, climate action.
And what's the verdict?
The authors firmly established AI as a profound catalyst. Just take health, SDG 3. AI can significantly improve the speed and accuracy of diagnoses through image analysis, for example, and it helps facilitate better resource allocation in remote areas, which increases accessibility.
And for climate.
For climate action, SDG 13, it allows for infinitely more precise climate modeling. You get real-time monitoring of resource depletion, and it can optimize energy use on a massive scale.
So, if the technology is this powerful, and it clearly is, why aren't these regions meeting their SDG targets faster? It sounds like it circles right back to the structural concerns from the last article, doesn't it?
Precisely. The authors map out three major obstacles that are preventing AI from being the silver bullet it promises to be. First, and it's the big one, the ubiquitous digital divide.
Right.
Low-income nations just don't have the robust compute power, the data centers, the high-speed infrastructure that you need to run these complex AI models efficiently.
And the people to run them.
That's the second obstacle. There's a severe global and regional shortage of expert technologists, people who can build, train, and maintain these systems locally. And third, you have those recurring ethical concerns over data security, patient privacy, and making sure that the AI is used responsibly and without bias. Those are still critical roadblocks.
This research really highlights a core intellectual challenge, then. The technology is, theoretically ready to solve these huge global problems. But the equitable and sustainable foundation you need to deploy it across the global south, it often just doesn't exist.
And that lack of foundation, it doesn't just limit AI, it limits other pedagogical shifts too, like the flipped classroom model.
Which brings us right to Article 3, Flipped Classroom in Nepalese English Language Teaching, ELT. This is a narrative inquiry by Pitambar Paudel, a lecturer in Pokhara, and he's focusing on teachers in the Kasauski district.
Right. And for listeners who might not be familiar with the flipped classroom idea, it's pretty simple.
You essentially just reverse the traditional teaching model.
Exactly. The content delivery, the lectures, the readings, that all happens at home before class. And then you use the actual class time for active learning, problem solving, and discussion.
And Paudel found that it worked.
He found that when it's executed properly, the model is highly effective. It successfully reverses that passive nature of traditional ELT. He saw a significant boost in student participation, in collaboration, and in individual autonomy.
Which makes sense from a learning theory perspective.
It aligns perfectly with modern learning theories like constructivism, the idea that learners actively construct knowledge rather than just passively receiving it, and also connectivism, which emphasizes how learning happens through networks and connections, often digital ones. The model forces engagement, and it changes the teacher from a lecturer into a facilitator.
So if it's so effective, why isn't every classroom in Nepal flipped?
Because of the local constraints. Again, teachers reported that the same reliable internet access that AI needs is also essential for students to be able to complete their pre-class work.
And if the access is spotty,
When access is unreliable, the assignments become inconsistent and student engagement just plummets. They simply don't do the pre-work. And this forces the teacher to go back to lecturing in class, which completely defeats the purpose of the model.
I can see that. And I'm sure there's cultural resistance too.
A lot of it. There's this deeply established teacher-centered mindset that's hard to break.
Yeah.
And also the high workload involved in creating quality pre-class material videos, readings, quizzes that really limits the model's sustainability in the long run.
It's just fascinating how every single innovative model we've looked at, AI, flipped classrooms, they're all bottlenecked by the exact same fundamental structural challenges.
It's a recurring theme.
Okay, so finally in this cluster, we're going to look at teacher support itself. Article 4 is Collaborative Learning for English Language Teachers Professional Development. This was another narrative inquiry, and it involved 5 teachers in Kathmandu.
And this research offers a really vital counterpoint to the high-tech focus we've had so far. It basically asks, okay, when the technology and the institutional support are lacking, what's left?
And the answer is
Peer collaboration. It becomes this indispensable mechanism for professional resilience and growth. The teachers in this study found that sharing practical best practices, scaffolding support for complex tasks, and co-creating materials, all of that was absolutely crucial.
And what were the specific professional outcomes that this collaboration enabled?
Well, it was crucial for really practical improvements. Things like enhancing classroom management, adopting more contemporary instructional pedagogies, and maybe most importantly for the novice educators, it helped them transition from their initial, often idealistic identity as a teacher to becoming a confident, experienced professional.
So in these resource-strained environments, the community of practice, their colleagues, they provide the essential developmental structure that the formal training systems often fail to deliver.
That's it exactly.
Okay, so let's just unpack this first cluster. We've established that the desire and, the theoretical framework for high-impact innovation are clearly present. But the lack of basic digital infrastructure and supportive institutional policy means these innovations are often operating at, 20% capacity?
That's a good way to put it. It's a recurring theme of profound potential that's just constrained by this structural reality.
There's a real paradox.
It is. The research paints this picture of highly motivated teachers who are actively seeking out global best practices, but they are consistently undercut by unreliable infrastructure and insufficient government investment in these digital foundations and in specialized capacity building. They're trying to run a marathon, but they've only been given one shoe.
So, moving on from digital disruption, our second cluster really drills down into the core mechanisms of the education system itself. We're talking assessment, professional development, and curriculum delivery. We're going to start with a look at a major reform effort. Teachers' Perspectives on Nepal's Continuous Assessment System, CAS, Opportunities and Challenges, by Nar Bahadur Bist and Nirajan Bohara.
This study was examining the CAS that was implemented for grades 1 through 3, and it used a social constructivist lens to do it.
And what's the verdict on the system itself, in theory?
From a theoretical standpoint, the system is brilliant. It fundamentally shifts assessment away from those high-stakes, end-of-term exams and moves it toward continuous formative feedback.
Which should maximize student learning.
It does, because it assesses a whole range of diverse abilities, not just rote recall on a test. It can look at projects, behavior, collaboration, and it actively works to develop critical thinking skills.
That developmental approach sounds perfectly aligned with modern psychological theory.
It is. It aligns beautifully with Vygotsky's theory of the zone of proximal development, or ZPD.
Can you just quickly unpack that for us?
Sure. The ZPD is basically the sweet spot for learning. It's the space between what a child can do on their own and what they can achieve with guidance from a more knowledgeable other, in this case, the teacher.
So CAS is the tool to find that zone.
Exactly. CAS provides the mechanism for the teacher to continuously assess where that ZPD lies for each individual student and then provide the exact scaffolding they need to bridge that gap.
So the policy is progressive, it's smart, but we know from the last cluster that policy often fractures when it hits reality. What are the practical challenges teachers are facing when they try to implement this constant individualized feedback loop?
The challenges are immense, and they are almost entirely workload-based.
Just too much work.
Way too much. Teachers reported that CAS is extremely time-consuming. I mean, to implement it correctly, you have to create, manage, and continually update these detailed student portfolios. That involves extensive documentation that goes way beyond traditional grading.
And the training for this new system.
That's another huge problem. The system suffers from a lack of formal government-managed training. So you have a lot of teachers who are trying to execute this complex new policy based on, vague instructions or a one-day workshop.
And if they don't have enough staff, it just becomes impossible.
Precisely. The most severe systemic challenge is the insufficient teacher quotas. Teachers are often required to manage extremely heavy workloads, teaching 6 or even 7 periods a day.
Wow.
And that kind of workload makes the timely and meaningful implementation of remedial teaching, which is the entire point of formative assessment, makes it nearly impossible. The gap between the policy's progressive intent and the resources allocated for its execution is just staggering.
Following on from that, Article 6 looks directly at how teachers try to maintain their skills amidst all these systemic pressures. It's titled Secondary Level English Language Teachers Professional Development: Perceptions and Practices by Mahesh Singh Saud, and it focuses on the Darchula and Betati districts in Nepal.
Saud's inquiry confirms that teachers possess this really high internal drive. They perceive professional development, or PD, as absolutely essential for maintaining dynamism in the classroom, for empowering their instructional practices, and for staying current with global methodological shifts.
So they're not just waiting for the government to train them. Their practices are often self-directed.
Very much so.
What does that self-directed learning actually look like on the ground?
It ranges from, self-initiated research, so watching specific ELT videos on YouTube, reading pedagogical materials they find online, writing short reflections on ELT issues, all the way to actively seeking out profession-related activities, things like regional conferences and localized training sessions, even if those are pretty intermittent.
It's a really commendable individual initiative, but what structural constraints are limiting them from converting that initiative into widespread, high-quality instruction?
Well, it's the same constraints we keep seeing. Persistent internet connectivity issues limit their access to global online resources. There's a lack of issue-focused professional events that are tailored precisely to the local needs of these specific districts. And maybe most crucially, there's just insufficient sustained support from school administrations and the relevant government authorities.
So the desire for PD is high, but the access to relevant, well-supported, and continuous professional support remains severely fragmented.
That's a perfect summary.
Okay, now let's look at a very specific recurring pedagogical failure, the teaching of poetry, and see how local action research can provide a clear, evidence-based pathway for systemic change. So Article 7 is a targeted critique. It's called Critique of Traditional Poetry Teaching Strategies in Nepalese EFL Classrooms.
And this article really establishes the persistence of these extremely passive and, frankly, ineffective teacher-centered methods. The findings show that traditional poetry teaching in Nepal relies almost exclusively on the teacher, providing a line-by-line explanation, translating difficult words into the mother tongue, and then dictating a single authorized interpretation of the poem.
And the outcome of that approach is predictable, I guess.
It's student passivity. The primary learning objective becomes just memorizing the teacher's summary. It's not about developing individual creativity or critical thinking or, a personal emotional connection to the poem.
So the methods are completely failing to recognize that poetry is supposed to be a subjective, aesthetic experience.
Exactly. The curriculum requirements aren't actually being met because the students are just focused on rote output, not on meaningful language acquisition.
That sets up a perfect call to action, which is then answered immediately by Article 8. Exploratory Action Research, EAR, to enhance student engagement in poetry teaching. So this one details a successful intervention that was designed to fix the very problem identified in Article 7.
Right, and the researchers here intentionally used reader response theory. This is a framework that asserts that the meaning of a text isn't just inherent in the words on the page. It's created through the active interaction between the reader and the text.
So the intervention strategies were all about being context-sensitive and learner-centered.
Precisely. For example, they introduced activities like asking students to predict the theme of a poem simply from looking at the title or an accompanying picture.
And was that predictive strategy effective?
It was highly effective.
Right.
75% of the students found that strategy helpful. It immediately boosted engagement because it made them active participants from the very beginning, not just passive receivers of information.
And what other strategies worked?
Other successful ones included establishing explicit connections between the poem's themes and the students' own real-life experiences. using pair reading to improve fluency and understanding, and encouraging creative writing of personalized summaries instead of just memorizing one.
This action research provides a really crucial contribution then. It demonstrates that when teachers adopt these practical, research-informed methods that promote student agency and meaning-making, they can successfully bridge that gap between traditional rote learning and genuinely meaningful language acquisition.
And the results aren't just theoretical. They are grounded in direct, tangible classroom evidence. It's a clear roadmap for change.
Okay, our third cluster now broadens the lens considerably. We're moving out of the classroom and focusing on economics, finance, urban sustainability, and some of the massive socioeconomic pressure points that are driving human behavior across both Nepal and Bangladesh.
It's a big shift in scale.
It is. We're going to start with a major quantitative finding in financial behavior. This is variables influencing funding decisions in mutual funds among Nepali investors. It was a study of 384 investors by Tikram Karel, Shivaraj Pudel, and Pratik Karel. And they measured 4 key variables against investment decisions.
Right, so the variables they tested were first, economic position, or EP.
So how much money you have.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
Then risk-bearing behavior, RBB.
Your appetite for risk.
Exactly. Third was return from investment, RFI. And fourth was access to information, or ACC.INF. Now, the initial correlation analysis confirmed that all 4 of these variables showed a positive correlation with investment decisions, which is generally what you would expect in financial modeling.
But the key, as always, lies in the subsequent multiple regression analysis, which isolates the specific statistical weight of each factor. And this is where they found a genuinely surprising, almost counterintuitive result, especially regarding the factor we usually assume is the most important, the return on the investment itself.
It was a stunning finding. It really challenges some fundamental assumptions we have in finance. The analysis showed that EP, your economic position, RBB, your risk-bearing behavior, and ACC.INF, your access to information, all had a statistically significant positive effect on investment decisions.
Okay.
But the variable we traditionally prioritize, return from investment, RFI, was found to be statistically insignificant at the 0.05 level.
Okay, let's pause and unpack the profound implication of that insignificance, because that sounds huge. In plain terms, what does it mean when the potential return doesn't significantly drive the decision to invest?
It means that for these Nepali investors, the decision to put money into a mutual fund is not primarily a function of projected growth or aggressive return targets. Instead, their choices are overwhelmingly driven by factors related to safety, transparency, and their own personal capital.
So it's about not losing money rather than making money.
That's a big part of it. Their current financial status, EP, showed the strongest correlation by far at most 790. This just speaks volumes about a cautious market environment where investors are prioritizing capital preservation, risk mitigation, and ensuring the reliability and accessibility of information over the promise of high growth.
So this is potentially a reflection of low market trust, or maybe a behavioral finance phenomenon like loss aversion. If I have limited capital, I care a lot less about maximizing a 10% return and a lot more about minimizing the chance of losing my 500,000 rupees.
I think that's exactly it.
The implication for financial institutions then is crystal clear. Stop overselling high return.
Exactly. The strategies that are needed to attract and build investor confidence must prioritize enhanced transparency, education, and accessible information. They need to focus on the stability and security of the fund rather than relying solely on performance-driven marketing. It completely reorients the focus from aggressive growth metrics to structural reliability and investor trust.
That focus on structural stability leads us perfectly into the next article, which looks at sustainability within small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs. This one is Exploration of Management Accounting Practices, MAPs, and Circular Economy Innovation in Nepalese SMEs. This was a quantitative study focused on 116 respondents in Zangadi sub-metropolitan city.
This research measured the adoption of these management accounting practices and the role of management accounting controls, or MACs, in supporting both circular economy innovation and business performance. The key insight here is that these MACs are not just, bureaucratic overhead. They are strategic facilitators for sustainability.
How does an accounting control, which sounds rigid and backward-looking, actively facilitate forward-looking environmental innovation?
It's because it provides the data that's necessary for strategic decision-making. Strong management accounting controls enable these SMEs to accurately track the true and often hidden costs of their material inputs, their waste streams, and their energy consumption.
So it makes the waste visible.
It makes it visible, and it puts a price on it. By providing this detailed operational data, the MACs force management to identify inefficiencies, and that, in turn, incentivizes them to embrace circular economy innovations, like redesigning products for resource efficiency, implementing remanufacturing processes, or drastically reducing waste. The controls transform resource conservation from just a cost burden into a real profitability opportunity.
So it creates this synergistic effect on both economic development and environmental responsibility.
That's the argument.
That's a powerful argument for integrating sustainability into the core business model, not just treating it as a separate compliance issue.
Okay, now we're taking a geographic shift to Bangladesh for Article 11. This is exploring the prospects and challenges of sustainable waterfront development in Bangladesh, and it focuses on the Tuareg River waterfront in Dhaka.
This was an extensive study, and it investigated the three pillars of sustainability: environmental, social, and economic operation, this really crucial urban space. What they found was a deeply imbalanced scenario.
How so? The waterfront is economically vital and socially vibrant. It supports numerous livelihoods, a lot of informal trade, leisure activities, and it acts as a major commuting artery for the city.
So high social and economic scores, but I'm guessing a major environmental deficit.
A severe deficit. The environmental dimension is by far the weakest link. The Tuareg River suffers from immense ecological stress due to high industrial and domestic pollution, ineffective waste management practices, and severe erosion. There is a complete lack of any systematic habitat restoration or ecological planning integrated into how the area is used.
And what about the social pillar? Where does that fall short?
Even the social pillar, which is strong, is flawed by equity issues. While the area is heavily used, safety is a huge concern at night, and there's a pronounced lack of infrastructure that facilitates equitable use for all citizens.
Specifically, inadequate facilities for women, for the elderly, and for disabled individuals. This prevents truly inclusive public access. The core implication is that achieving sustainability there requires coordinated, integrated policy actions among all the major municipal agencies, BWTA, RGK, and the city corporations, to harmonize inclusive design with ecological restoration. And this needs to align with national policy frameworks like the Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100.
Okay, finally, we return to Nepal for a systemic economic problem viewed through an academic lens. This is decline in student enrollment in higher education, causes and strategies in Kanchanpur district, Nepal. This one gathered both qualitative and quantitative data from 40 college teachers.
And the problem they're looking at is critical. The data showed a significant decline in enrollment, particularly at the undergraduate level. That means students are opting out of the domestic university system right after they finish secondary school.
And what are the causes? The teachers cited fundamentally economic ones, right? It's a calculation of opportunity cost, completely. The primary drivers are the lack of guaranteed employment or job security after you graduate, combined with an overwhelming preference for immediate income, or more frequently, securing a work visa to go abroad.
So the economic pull factor of migration or just getting a job right away outweighs the perceived value of a four-year domestic degree. But are there internal academic flaws that are pushing them away as well?
Oh, absolutely. The teachers themselves identified serious systemic problems within the academic structure. The courses are often perceived as being too traditional, lacking the applied nature and the skills that are needed for the modern job market.
And the timeline.
The timeline is a huge disincentive. The failure to strictly adhere to the four-year academic calendar, where degrees often drag on for 5 or even 6 years, is a major problem. That inefficiency costs students valuable time and income potential, which makes foreign education options, even with the higher upfront cost, seem more reliable and relevant.
So the solutions they suggest, therefore, demand sweeping systemic reform. Revamping the curriculum to introduce highly applied, relevant courses, strictly adhering to the academic calendar for efficiency, and improving foundational facilities like hostels and scholarships to address those socioeconomic barriers.
It's a tall order, but it's what's needed.
Okay, this next cluster, our fourth, offers a really profound look at how people define themselves, their community, and their vulnerabilities in the middle of all this modernization, urbanization, and cultural change.
It gets very personal and very deep.
It does. We're starting with a powerful ethnographic look at the elderly in the capital city. This is Aging Narratives and Social Change in Kathmandu, an ethnographic study of personhood and well-being. This was led by Saruj Pokharel and a team, and they were focusing on older adults, 60 and over, in Tarkeshwar municipality.
And the core tension that the researchers identified, it just perfectly captures the deep fracture that's being caused by urbanization and, critically, by youth outmigration. They coined this incredible phrase for it, the paradox of veneration versus valuation.
That phrase is incredibly descriptive. Explain how that paradox actually plays out in their lives.
Well, culturally, older persons are traditionally revered for their wisdom, their role in maintaining tradition, and their historical knowledge. They are venerated.
Right.
However, their practical social worth and their dignity, their valuation, is becoming increasingly contingent on their economic resources. Things like having an independent pension, owning real estate, and having guaranteed access to modern biomedicine.
So the traditional intergenerational support systems, which used to guarantee care and relevance, are eroding as the youth move abroad or to other urban centers.
That's exactly it.
The consequence must be a radical shift in how they see themselves, in their selfhood. I mean, if your value used to be guaranteed by your identity, by your age, and now it's tied to your bank account, that must be incredibly destabilizing.
It is. The core consequences they identified are heightened loneliness, significant stress that arises from trying to manage chronic health problems without reliable caregiver support, and a profound erosion of dignity when they lack independent financial capital. Aging in modern, urban Nepal is becoming this identity-contested process where their social relevance is increasingly quantified by capital. It forces them to adapt their social roles just to maintain relevance in this very transactional, fast-moving environment.
That sense of vulnerability leads us directly to Article 14, which focuses on a group that's often overlooked. This is Sexual and Reproductive Health, SRH, among women with disabilities in Kalali District, Nepal, by Lal Singh Karki. This was a descriptive research study that surveyed 40 married women with disabilities.
And this research just exposes multiple layers of systemic neglect and severe vulnerability. The access barriers are manifold. You have simple lack of information, coupled with physical inaccessibility to health facilities like no wheelchair ramps or suitable facilities. And then you have these restrictive cultural prohibitions on top of that.
Which drastically limits their access to vital services like family planning and antenatal care.
It does. And the findings regarding their reported health issues were deeply alarming.
What did they find?
Well, beyond common gynecological issues like abdominal pain and irregular menstruation, the study found alarmingly high rates of reported sexual abuse.
Wow.
It just highlights the intense intersectional vulnerability these women face. They lack physical protection, they lack a voice, and they lack reliable health services, which makes them targets. The strong policy recommendation here is essential. Implementing targeted community participatory health programs and aggressive interventions to combat the social stigma that allows this violence and neglect to persist.
Turning now to cultural preservation and adaptation, Article 15 examines birth rituals and modernity among the Dangara Tharu of Nepal. This was an ethnographic fieldwork study by Shiv Charan Chaudhary.
This article analyzes the structural and cultural meaning of Dangara Tharu birth rituals. Things like the period of isolation, which is called Sonri, and the enduring role of traditional figures like the Sudini, who is the traditional midwife, and the Gurua, the traditional healer.
And these rituals have a deep cultural function.
A very deep one. They historically function to ensure the safety and spiritual purity of the mother and child, and vitally, to reaffirm deep community solidarity, though they do operate within an established patriarchal structure.
So does the pressure of modernization and biomedical expansion just erase these traditions?
Fascinatingly, no. What's happened is that modernization has fostered a form of cultural hybridity.
Meaning they coexist.
They coexist. Traditional healing practices and biomedical interventions are now assimilated into the birthing culture. So, for example, a woman might deliver her baby in a modern hospital, but the Sudini or the Gurua may still be called upon to perform certain spiritual or initial practical rites. These traditional figures retain a vital spiritual and practical role in ensuring the cultural continuity of the birth experience.
So the implication for public health officials is that they shouldn't view these rituals as antagonistic barriers to modern maternal health.
Exactly. Healthcare practitioners have to recognize these rituals as essential cultural context. Incorporating this local knowledge into maternal health delivery programs actually improves community acceptance and ultimately the effectiveness and the long-term sustainability of modern health initiatives.
Our final article in this cluster takes us far into Northeast India for a look at a sophisticated indigenous cosmology. This is The Danyu Polo Cosmos, Sun and Moon Mythology and Amazing Folk Tales by Shiva Prasad Mili. It focuses on the missing people of Assam and Arunachal Pradesh.
This is a remarkable piece of cultural analysis. It explores the Mizing oral tradition, where Doni, the sun, and Polo, the moon, function as the central moral axis of the entire community. They're portrayed as ancestral parents, as the original lawgivers, and crucially, as unblinking witnesses to everything.
How does that cosmology translate into a practical, everyday ethical framework?
The system is articulated not as, a primitive fear-based religion, but as a sophisticated moral philosophy that's delivered through story.
That's a great way to put it.
The constant gaze of Dani and Polo ensures that all ethical conduct is, in a sense, public, even private acts. For example, their myths dictate that lies leave indelible stains on the moon. It's a celestial metaphor that reinforces accountability. Broken taboos are translated into permanent separation, which is manifested in the natural world as lightning and thunder.
So the cosmos itself provides the legal and the ethical architecture for an oral society.
Precisely. It functions as a durable, highly sophisticated framework for social order and for ecological management. Even agricultural practice requires a ritual apology to any animals that might be harmed during cultivation. It just demonstrates how this deep-seated cultural knowledge acts as a resilient and functional system for survival and morality in the face of ongoing modernization pressures. It is a living, breathing intellectual tradition.
Okay, our final cluster now shifts the focus entirely. We're applying high theory and critical analysis to literature and to foundational educational materials. It really proves the breadth of the scholarship and exploration. We start by blurring the lines between humanity and technology with Posthumanism in the Wind-Up Girl, Blurring Boundaries Between Human and Machine by Sharad Acharya.
This is a qualitative textual analysis that uses the framework of posthumanist theory, drawing on thinkers like Donna Haraway and Ray Kurzweil, to examine Paolo Bacigalupi's dystopian novel.
And posthumanism fundamentally challenges what, exactly?
It challenges human exceptionalism. That's the idea that humans are inherently distinct from and superior to all other life forms or technological constructs.
And the character Emiko, the genetically engineered wind-up, she serves as the perfect vehicle for this critique.
She absolutely embodies hybridity. Emiko is engineered for subservience. She has this programmed genetic urge to please, which is in direct conflict with her emergent, very human-like agency, her capacity for sorrow, and her desire for freedom. The novel critiques the species hierarchy that's been established by the human world, where life is valued based on how far it is from technology or genetic modification.
So what are the novel's ethical stakes when it comes to this technologically mediated life?
The primary stake is moral obligation. The relationship between the human protagonist, Anderson, and Emiko is crucial to this. He starts off by viewing her as a mere commodity, a toy created by genetic engineering, but his evolving perspective forces him to eventually recognize her as an equal being who deserves protection and dignity.
So his shift shows the blurring of those moral categories.
It does. As technology creates these complex new forms of life, it demands that we redefine what personhood even entails.
Moving from the ethical stakes of the future to the historical roots of exploitation, we now turn to a post-colonial lens with this next article. A post-colonial reading of Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe.
This is a classic text viewed through a very critical theory lens, using frameworks established by thinkers like Homi Bhabha, Frantz Fanon, and Edward Said. The analysis critiques Crusoe not simply as a survival tale, but as a seminal literary expression of modern imperialism and proto-capitalism.
And the core argument.
The core argument is that Crusoe's claimed civilizing mission is really just a moral rationalization. It's used to impose a hierarchy and to justify the exploitation of both the land and its people.
And how does the character Friday embody that colonial dynamic?
Friday's attempt to adopt European ways, what Bhabha called mimicry, is key here. He learns English, he adopts European dress, he displays this unwavering loyalty. This mimicry, however, just exposes the deep power imbalance. His obedience sustains the cultural domination, and it masks the underlying coercive structural forces that are compelling his assimilation.
And what about the proto-capitalism angle?
The critique also focuses on Crusoe's proto-capitalist mindset. He treats this deserted island purely as an economic asset that needs to be managed for maximum profit. He utilizes Friday's labor as a slave or a colonized subject for constant economic productivity, which firmly links the idea of capitalist accumulation with these colonial ventures.
That's a profound observation about a book that's so often taught as just a simple adventure story. Next, we have a deep dive into traditional literary theory itself, with an article analyzing the Nepali short story, Akanta, through the lens of Karuna Rasa, or pathos and grief.
This is a really nuanced piece of literary criticism that uses the ancient Sanskrit aesthetic theory, Rasa Siddhanta. This theory dictates that art generates specific, structured emotional experiences, or rasa in the reader or the audience.
So the article is providing a detailed analysis of how the sentiment of Karuna Rasa, grief and pathos is generated and sustained in the audience reading this story by Manu Prajaki. When we talk about generating an aesthetic emotion, what are the specific mechanisms defined by Rasa Siddhanta that the critic was able to isolate here?
The critic meticulously isolates the four core components. First, the permanent state, the staikabhava, must be present. In this case, that's shoka, or grief.
Okay.
Second, this permanent state is awakened by the determinants, the vibhavas. These are the external causes of the emotion. So in the story, it's the dead child and the weeping mother.
Right, the triggers.
The triggers. Third, the emotion is expressed through the consequence, the anuhavas. These are the physical manifestations, things like paleness, sighing, and uncontrollable weeping.
And when those three components, the state, the cause, and the expression all align, what happens?
They lead to the powerful and complete manifestation of Karuna Rasa in the heart of the knowledgeable reader. It's a cathartic realization of pathos. The analysis is just a wonderful example of applying a durable, sophisticated classical theory to contemporary regional literature.
And we circle all the way back to education to finish our full systematic review of the volume, looking at the enduring role of the core tool of the classroom, the role of ELT textbooks as a foundation for learning and instructional planning.
This was a phenomenological study with BEd English students, and it really affirms the vital foundational role of the textbook in Nepal, especially in these low-resource environments. The core argument is that textbooks serve as the absolute major source of learning. They provide a systematic, a chronological, and a cost-effective roadmap for students.
So in an environment where reliable internet is uncertain and specialized materials are scarce, the textbook is the ultimate anchor for the entire system.
Absolutely. For teachers, the textbook serves as the necessary, systematic framework for their instructional planning. It gives them a structured curriculum to follow. For students, it's essential for building foundational knowledge and for promoting self-directed learning habits.
But I'm sure it's not without its critics.
Oh, of course. The research acknowledges the pedagogical need for teachers to integrate supplementary materials to enhance communicative competence. But the textbook remains the indispensable starting point, and in many ways, the primary constraint of the educational curriculum.
So having traversed this vast intellectual landscape, I mean, from the specifics of poetry teaching to quantitative finance and indigenous cosmology, we can now synthesize the major global-local tensions that have been illuminated by these 20 articles in Exploration Volume 4.
It's a lot to pull together.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. We saw 3 major patterns repeating themselves across all these different disciplines. What's the first major tension that this volume highlights?
The first tension is consistently about AI opportunity versus educational reality.
Right.
The research repeatedly confirms the immense theoretical gains that are offered by global advancements like AI and the flipped classroom model. We're talking customized learning, efficiency gains, better health modeling. Yet the implementation is uniformly stymied by these foundational infrastructure deficits.
The lack of reliable internet, compute power.
And critically, insufficient investment in sustainable teacher training and digital literacy. We saw that in Articles 1, 2, and 3. The technology is ready, but the structural foundations are just not there.
And that structural reality seems intrinsically linked to the second tension, which we saw in both finance and anthropology, the conflict between the new economy and traditional value.
This is perhaps the most profound systemic shift identified in the whole volume. Socioeconomic status is becoming the defining quantified metric for social worth and dignity.
We saw it so dramatically in the aging narratives in Article 13.
We did. The elderly are culturally revered, but their practical worth and their dignity are increasingly contingent on financial stability and access to biomedicine. This is often replacing the traditional intergenerational support they used to count on.
And we saw the financial manifestation of that same anxiety too, right?
Absolutely. In the mutual fund decisions in Article 9, investment behavior is driven far more significantly by an investor's current financial position, so capital preservation, and the availability of transparent information, security, than it is by the aggressive anticipated return from investment. Financial capacity is driving the metric of value across the entire social and economic spectrum.
Yet, and this is important, the volume also shows that local cultures are not just passive victims of this modernization. They demonstrate this powerful resilience and adaptation.
That's the third tension, and it's the source of immense optimism, I think. Local systems are not simply collapsing, they are integrating and creating these new hybrid models. We saw this with the Dangara Tharu, where traditional birth rituals and modern biomedical practices now coexist in Article 15.
And in the Dani Polo cosmology.
Now, we saw it there, too, in Article 16, which functions as this durable, sophisticated legal and ethical framework for an oral society that's facing modernity. Cultural knowledge is proving to be a highly resilient system for survival, for morality, and for adaptation.
So you've just traversed 20 unique windows into the challenge of modernization in South Asia. This deep dive really shows a regional intellectual community that is grappling with how to integrate global advancements, AI, circular economy, post-humanism, while honoring and navigating these profound local realities. Unreliable internet, immense teacher workload, entrenched cultural continuity, and deep-seated structural inequities.
And this convergence, it forces us to reconcile the historical with the imminent. The critique of Robinson Crusoe in Article 18 reminds us that the commodification of worth and labor has these deep colonial and proto-capitalist roots. Now, in the face of this rapid change, if access to quality, relevant education is fragmented and the stability of traditional identity markers is declining, we have to ask a really tough question.
Which is?
What kind of post-human reality is currently being forged in this region for the next generation? Is it one of truly enhanced capabilities through equitable technology? Or is it one of enhanced exploitation driven by these inherited and accumulating systemic inequities?
The profound thought to end on, connecting 3 centuries of history to the challenges of the next decade. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.